The Man Who Didn't Kill Hitler, Part 2.
It was not well done. I returned to my own time to find that I had not made the world a better place, merely a different one. Zelt's crimes had been perpetrated by others who founded a similar movement and pursued much the same policies. The forces of history had not been stemmed or diverted, it seemed. To do that, I would have to change far more than the lifespan of one man. I sipped my scotch and made a supportive noise. I still had no idea where this was going, but it was intriguing. "You went back in time again?" "Yes," he said. "Again and again. At first, to my shame, I resorted to more assassinations. A killer who can materialize in a locked room, shoot a man dead, and vanish instantly cannot be caught. But despite my best efforts, all I did was change the world, not improve it. I became obsessed, and I traveled again and again. Instead of merely negative action, I tried to create incentives for goodness. I visited noble individuals, scientists, doctors, reformers, and dropped hints, left clues on how to accelerate progress. But all my efforts were... Something banged sharply against the big window behind me. The guy twisted round again, and other people looked, but there was nothing. "Kids messing around," I said. "Out too late at night." "Possibly," he said. "Possibly not." He was staring into the fog, which was getting thicker. Hannigan's isn't one of those overlit, garish places, but at that moment, I shivered a little and wished the lighting inside wasn't quite so subdued. "You were saying?" I prompted. "Yes," he said. "Your payment. My story. As I said, it is simple. I invented time travel, and in doing so, I committed a crime against reality itself. That was what I realized too late. The world I had tried to save kept changing every time I returned from my journeys into the past. But it never really changed for the better. All that happened was that everyone I knew disappeared completely or changed beyond all recognition. People I loved became strangers. If this was a story, it was one with plenty of twists. I tried to take what he said at face value. "So you kept changing the present by changing the past? But once you'd started, you couldn't stop, like you were..." I paused. I was about to say, "like you were eating Pringles." But it seemed too flippant for a start. And I had this genuine, growing conviction that the guy had never heard of Pringles. Not that he'd pretend not to know about them, no, but that he really never had. At some level, I was starting to believe him. Of course, crazy people can be convincing, even if what they say is ridiculous. Spend enough time talking to a conspiracy theorist, and you may end up in a tinfoil hat yourself. But this was different. I'd literally met the guy 10 minutes ago, and he'd made a huge impression. Whatever he was not just some guy in a bar spinning a dumb yarn. "You are right, at least in part," said the stranger. I had misunderstood the fundamental nature of things. I had assumed from the start that there was one timeline and that it could be altered. I came to realize that, in fact, there must be an infinite number of timelines, all possible histories of the world, lying parallel to one another. All I had done was discover a way to travel diagonally, back and forth. I had cast myself adrift between continua, and there is no way home. I felt a sudden urge to pat the guy on the arm and tell him it wasn't so bad. He looked so forlorn at that moment, so tired. I wondered when he'd last eaten. Then I wondered what had stopped him from eating, because he seemed more than lost. He looked haunted, or maybe hunted. As if to underline that point, he looked over his shoulder again. As he did so, his coat, which he'd partly unbuttoned to take out the money, fell open to the waist. I glimpsed something inside. It was kind of a pale glow, white with a hint of green. And there were other lights, small ones, letters and numbers like on a digital clock. He turned back and saw where I was looking. He smiled. "The device I use is essentially self-powered," he said. "One of the virtues of doing the impossible is free energy. but it is harmless. I merely need to let it recharge for a few more minutes, and then I can move on." "Why move on?" I asked. "Okay, so there's no direction home for you, but why not stay in a world that's, congenial, safe, or at least not too dangerous? Find a pawnbroker or something, sell some of those coins." But he was already shaking his head. "That was my original intention," he admitted, when I realized I was wandering aimlessly between timelines. But by then, I had already strayed too far. I could not remain long in any one place or time. I had attracted unwanted attention. I felt a chill then, as if the fog outside had crept in under the door and insinuated itself under my shirt. I shivered. Those two simple words, unwanted attention, seemed to carry a whole world of menace. Something hit the window again, softer this time that one could barely hear it. But we both jumped and spun around. Nothing was there, again. Then I saw Harry looking puzzled. He'd been facing the window. "Kids, Harry?" I asked. He shrugged. For the first time in the 18 years that I'd been patronizing Hannigan's, Harry looked uncertain, unnerved even. I didn't ask what he'd seen. Instead, I turned back to the tall stranger. "This attention, it was from other time travelers, right?" I asked. "Like time cops trying to bust you for driving without a license." He shook his head. "No, nothing so benevolent." He was looking at my scotch. I slid it along the bar, and he took it, gulped down what was left. "I do not know what they are," he continued. "I only know that they detected me and followed me across the timelines, through different histories, different worlds. The first I saw of them was when they nearly caught me. I managed to escape by jumping randomly back and forth in time, repeatedly." He reached inside his coat, and I heard a slight click, like a button or switch being pushed. "I will be gone soon," he said. "So I will be concise. I believe that they are the reason I failed. These entities, beings that somehow navigate between timelines, are the cause of much suffering. Not all of it, of course. There will always be mishaps, foolishness. But the great horrors, the true atrocities, are cultivated by these creatures. I think they feed on our misery. I will not explain how I formed this theory. Suffice to say, I saw their methods." I lowered my voice, glancing at the mirror, half expecting to see some weird face peering in. If it were a con job of some kind, he might have had an accomplice. If it wasn't, well, I just didn't want to credit that alternative. "You mean these things are like vampires?" I asked. "Only they somehow feed off history?" He shrugged. "We speak of the forces of history. Forces imply energy, and energy can be fed upon, or harvested. All I can be sure of is that they sensed me and decided that I was an intruder, and they have been pursuing me for what seems like an eternity. I was totally invested in the story now. If it were a scam, I didn't care. But my skepticism had pretty much evaporated. "What do they look like?" I asked. "They are nightmares," he said simply. "An abundance of eyes and too many limbs. I cannot describe them. Besides, it might not be safe for you to know. They hate to be seen by humans, which is why I sought refuge here. Perhaps I have already said too much. And now?" He stood up, towering over me. Again, his coat fell open, and this time, I saw what I suppose was his time machine. It seemed to consist of various gadgets held in place by dark gray webbing, a bit like you'd see on a parachute. There were readouts, a small control panel, and at the center, a kind of metal disc. The center of this disc had a dome-shaped light about 4 inches across that I couldn't quite focus on. It was the source of the greenish glow I'd seen before. I took off my glasses, but it still seemed blurred. It pulsed more brightly now. "I will move on," he said, touching my arm with one huge, gnarled hand. "Thank you, kind stranger, for providing me with a little human company." He walked off, not toward the exit, but the men's washroom. It seemed a weird anticlimax to his amazing story, But I guess even time travelers had to take a leak now and again. Harry had drifted back up the bar to collect the glasses, and I raised an eyebrow at him. "Unusual guy," Harry remarked, voice neutral. "Incredible," I said, and laughed, slightly embarrassed at how enthralled I'd been by the story. "You running some kind of hidden camera stunt, Harry?" "Nope," he said, as I knew he would. "Hannigan's isn't that kind of place." "Okay," I shrugged. Harry's presence made me feel like a fool for half believing the guy, even for a few minutes. Maybe he just wants to spread a weird rumor and set the web buzzing with talk about time travelers and monsters. Some people get a kick out of fooling people, but he was so damn convincing, and he took the trouble to make that gizmo he was wearing. "The best ones always are," Harry said sagely. "And who can tell why somebody does anything?" I was already feeling normality reassert itself. I'd been under the guy's spell, sure, but as soon as the stranger was out of sight, I felt that all the stuff he'd told me was nonsensy. I still couldn't work out what kind of scam he might be trying to pull, if any, and I didn't care. He'd given me the water cooler story I'd hoped for, and tomorrow at work, I'd get my share of the limelight. "Guess I better get going," I said, stretching and climbing off my stool. "Mind how you go," Harry said, as he always did. Then it happened. There was this noise from the men's room, a high-pitched whine rising to a crescendo. It sounded a bit like an electric motor being pushed to the limit. At the same time, I heard a cry, and I recognized the voice of the stranger. He was scared, in pain, maybe both. There was a flicker of light under the door, a pulsing greenish light. I was nearest, and I rushed over. I forgot the story. All I had in mind was that somebody was in trouble. I had just gotten hold of the handle when I heard another noise, just audible under that piercing, mechanical whine. It was a kind of grunting and snarling, not quite like any animal I've heard, but not human either. I admit, I hesitated, just for a second. Then I flung the door open and rushed inside. I was barely in time to see it. The stranger was standing in the middle of the washroom in front of the hand basins, facing me. The glow from the disc on his chest was intense now, so bright it almost blinded me after the soft ambiance of the bar. But I could still see that he wasn't alone. He couldn't describe them to me. But I'll try. Too many eyes, glowing red with intelligence and cold hostility. Too many limbs, pale and boneless, wrapped around the time traveler. They had him at that moment. I could sense their hatred, their triumph, and other things too. Their alien thoughts radiated like a wave of foulness, almost swamping my mind. I glimpsed, for a fraction of a second, what they were about to do to that lonely wanderer, and I almost retched. Then they saw me. It was all he needed, the stranger. I saw him move his hand, despite the grip of those glistening tentacles, and work some kind of control. The greenish radiance flickered and then pulsed so brightly that I flung up my hands to cover my eyes. I heard Harry somewhere behind me curse, another first. I could see nothing but whirling patterns of green and orange for a few seconds as my vision recovered. Then I could see again, and he was gone. Or very nearly. For a moment, I thought I saw that tall, gangly figure in its long coat fading away. It might have been an afterimage. Then Harry was beside me, holding me up as I staggered sideways and nearly fell into a toilet cubicle. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied. He helped me back to the bar through the little crowd. People were asking questions neither of us could answer. "Drama's over, nothing to see," Harry told them. "Guy pulled some kind of vanishing trick. Very smart. Get on YouTube, Reddit, whatever. See if he uploads anything." They all took out their phones like trained monkeys. Harry knew how to shut people up. He sat me down and brought me another scotch, on the house. I thanked him and downed it in one gulp. "I guess that was a neat trick, like some magician in Vegas," he mused. Yeah, I said. I guess. I didn't tell the story at work the next day. It had been a couple of weeks now, and Harry has put the gold coin the stranger left behind the bar. We don't talk about that night. Harry doesn't raise any topic with the clientele, and I am not going to either. So I work, and I have a beer after work, and I eat and watch TV and sleep like everything is normal. But sometimes I worry, because in that brief moment when I saw the time traveler vanish, I also saw the things that were hunting him, and they saw me. That was what made me damn near collapse, not the flash of light. Because when they saw me, they really saw me. They saw right through to the core of me, the soul, if you like. They saw everything that made me human, all the weft and warp of my being. And that was bad enough, to feel such foul creatures knew your dirtiest little secrets, all your hopes and fears. It was far worse than any burglar rummaging through your stuff. It was disgusting. I also caught a glimpse of their minds as they probed mine. I saw how they changed people, how they planted the seeds of hatred, how they took even the best human impulses and turned them sour and cruel. I felt the relish they took in suffering and knew their hunger for misery could never be satiated. And I felt their hatred for me, their rage that I had noticed them. I felt them ransack the memory of my talk with the stranger and felt their anger at how much he'd told me. They couldn't do anything about it then. Their quarry was escaping, and they had to chase him down. Hopefully they never catch him. But what are the odds, really? Maybe they'd forget me. Maybe they won't bother tying up one loose end, a guy with a crazy story nobody would believe. But I remember what the stranger had said about them not wanting to be seen. So now I seek out people, keep to crowded places whenever possible, travel by bus, avoid open spaces if there's nobody else around. I only wish I didn't live alone.